Hi, everyone, welcome in. This is Anchor Talk Counseling. First video. So we're going to kind of let this thing hopefully grow organically. I just wanted to kind of turn into something that will be a platform just to discuss all things mental health related. My approach is I am what we call the wounded healer. Wounded healer is something that we talked about a little bit in grad school. Essentially, I am a licensed therapist in the state of Massachusetts. I have my own practice, and at the same time, too, I am living with bipolar disorder. And I was diagnosed in 2010, and I've been working through it ever since. And as they say, day by day, right? I'd like to get into a position where I have some back and forth with folks. Would like to know what you'd like to know about, what you'd like to talk about. So before I get into that, I would like to talk a little bit about the background of what the idea of Anchor Talk counseling is. I did a little bit of research. I saw there were some other Anchor Talk platforms, but they weren't mental health related. The Anchor represents a lot of different things. It represents grounding, right? Just like a literal anchor in a boat would do. You don't want to move too far around. You want to be planted in a place. You want to feel some level of security. You would drop an anchor, right? The anchor also represents some consistency and also bringing you into a place where you feel like you're a bit more grounded, right? There's so many distractions in this world. There are so many things that can get us fucked up really quick, right? So I just really, me and my wife, when we were talking about the different names for my counseling practice, the Anchor Talk really stuck out to us. So it's a common theme, and that's why I've got one here, and I've got a few others, but I didn't post them up because I thought it was a little excessive. Again, my name is David Kapolis. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, currently living in South Carolina now. I still practice. My business is still out of Boston, Massachusetts. So that's me. You'll get to know me hopefully really well, and I'd like to get to know you all too. I'm really looking forward to the back and forth and how this thing grows. The other person you might want to know, slide over. I gotta slide this way. Yeah, there we go. So backwards in the camera. That is Lexi. She's my little toy Australian Shepherd. She's 10 years old. She's a rescue. She's quite a handful. She's got some mental health issues of herself. Lexi has in the past taken Prozac and Xanax, and certainly has a trauma history. Something I learned through my time is that animal brain structures are very similar to human brain structures. So some of the pharmaceuticals work the same. Anyways, that's another topic. So again, I guess that's enough of the intro. I'm hoping this thing can really kind of turn into something significant for people. My approach is a very real approach. I talk about all things related to mental health because, like I said, I live with bipolar disorder, and I'm also a licensed clinician, right? So I've been on both sides in every facet that you can think of. I was inpatient a couple of different times. When I was first diagnosed, I then had like a mental health relapse. And then, of course, as a training clinician, I worked in inpatient psychiatric. I was in a partial hospitalization program, and then I was running the clinical intake section of a partial hospitalization program at one time. I've worked in substance use inpatient. I've worked in family systems. I've worked with DCF, Department of Children and Families in the state of Massachusetts. Other states, it's DCYF or CPS. And I've done in-home therapy, I've done outreach therapy, I've worked with children and adolescents, I've worked with adults with diagnoses of all kinds, and I'm trained in marriage and family therapy, so I've done some couples work as well. And so a lot of what I'd like to be talking about throughout Anchor Talk is specific to themes that I find that sort of prop up like organically, like through the week. Um, I don't necessarily plan it. It just kind of happens. It's very strange how thematic elements can kind of come through when I'm working with my patients. And I guess for the first post, the first recording, I would like to cover, and again, I'm going to be kind of going through all sorts of different things. But today I'd like to cover existential psychology. Much of psychology, if not all, the root of psychology, it is rooted and based in philosophy. The Greeks really were the first to they didn't coin the term psychology, but they were the first to really kind of dig into what is the nature of the human condition and the human mind, right? And they dug into the ethics of it. Plato had Platonic ethics. He dug into virtue ethics and things like that. Very interesting. So as the years went on, when psychotherapy became prevalent in the 1800s with Freud, it wasn't until several years later, about 40, 50 years later, is when existential psychology came about. And one of the I guess you would say the forefathers of existential psychology was Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a Polish psychiatrist who studied psychoanalysis and Freudian thought. And he was one of the first to really dig into the nature of existentialism, which covers purpose and meaningfulness. Purpose and meaningfulness are two of the main tenets and pieces of existential psychology. And we can learn a lot from existential psychology. As you'll find, there's very much an abstract nature to psychology, which is kind of fucking annoying in some ways, because some people are like, "Can you give me a straight answer? What do you hell are you talking about?" And so I try to make this approachable, which is in my branding. I just want to make it real, approachable therapy with my patients, and then just real, approachable topics, with Anchor Talk. So today I'm covering Viktor Frankl. I'm not going to go through the whole book or anything, but his book is entitled Man's Search for Meaning. He means mankind, obviously. He doesn't just mean men. Pretty incredible book, kind of the book to go to when it comes to existential psychology, and the nature of just the context in which this book comes out. He was essentially, just to give you a synopsis, Viktor Frankl was captured during the Nazi invasion of Poland. And he was captured and put into the Auschwitz internment camp. Now, if anyone know anything about World War II and internment camps, those were the kill camps. And it's where millions of Jews were killed in horrific fashion. And he was in the worst, the largest and the worst internment camp. And essentially, where his theory of psychotherapy came from, it's called logotherapy, is his form of therapy, came out of his experience in a Nazi internment camp. And essentially what he had seen, again, to put it very simply in a synopsis, he was finding that now remember, he was a medical doctor, right? And a psychiatrist. So what he was making observations, and he saw that outside of direct killings, men and women were dying, and he couldn't figure out why. Some would live and some would not. Anything outside of there were no medical conclusions, and there were no other reasons that he could really figure out at the time. So Frankl made it his mission at Auschwitz to survive and to make meaning and purpose. Again, meaning and purpose, the common themes in Viktor Frankl. Right, so quite amazing man. But what he had recognized is that in the people who lived, the common theme is that they were holding on to hope, and they were trying to hold on to meaningfulness and purpose in their life. Now, for some people, that was family. For some people, that was work or success or something that they were holding on to that gave them hope to live or desire to live. And those that were dying and generally had lost all hope, frankly, in his terms. And so essentially, what you gain from learning about Viktor Frankl and existential psychology, as that relates to your life, like how can I relate this shit to my life? Like how do I make sense of that? What do you mean, David? What are you getting at? And what I'm getting at is that Frankl set the groundwork essentially for what became what we call fixed mindset and growth mindset. You know, a fixed mindset is a place where you just have pain or you just are stuck and you're not finding meaning in what happened. You're just upset about it. Maybe you hold on to resentments about it. Maybe it just hurts you every single day. I remember having a patient one time who was diagnosed with bereavement disorder, and her mother had passed 7 years previous, but she cried every single day as if it were the same, as if her mother had just passed. And so what Frankl teaches us is that if we can learn to create purpose from our pain and meaningfulness from our pain, then it doesn't become suffering. But pain without meaningfulness or purpose is suffering. You should kind of think about that for a second. It really makes a lot of sense. You know, you're in a position where you say you had a bad breakup, a divorce, say you have serious illness, just turmoil, pain. If you don't learn from this, if you can't glean something from it, then it continues to be suffering, and we continue to suffer. And it's as if we're being struck by the same arrows every single day. Now, obviously, that isn't to say that we should ignore our pain ever, but it also doesn't dismiss the pain either, right? Because some things are just fucking horrible. They're horrible, and they don't make sense in the immediacy of it all, right? So Frankl isn't saying immediately find meaningfulness and purpose in the terrible things that you've been through. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that if you keep a growth mindset, you'll get into a position where, okay, something will make sense for you, right? It will make sense. For him to survive Auschwitz, he recalled a time where he was thinking forward and he was saying to himself, I should write a book about this. I think that is what is the meaning of this. And he certainly did. He wrote an outstanding book with so many quotes. Frankl just has some of the deeper, more powerful existential quotes that you can find from any existentialist. So essentially, the life lesson in this one is no matter what you have gone through, it could be anything: loss, pain, sorrow, trauma. If we can learn to grow from that in some way, then the pain is still there, but it's not suffering. And the pain then eventually is in an open wound, and it just becomes a scar. It's a reminder, but scars don't hurt. They're reminders, right? So it's a powerful lesson Viktor Frankl teaches us, meaningfulness and purpose, right? So if you're struggling with divorce, if you're struggling with a recent diagnosis, bankruptcy, medical conditions, myself, I've had 5 different surgeries, and I had a massive heart attack when I was 34 years old. Did not see that coming. Deep, dark depression that was very different from bipolar depression. I've never experienced anything like that before. It was a real existential crisis, as it were, because it didn't make sense. I'm like, why the fuck did this happen? How could this happen? I'm doing all the right things. I'm working hard. I'm going to school. I want to help people, and I am helping people. I almost died. It's like, what is it? Well, I learned to take that and integrate it into my practice. I became really well read in health psychology, and in my intakes, I spend a lot more time now on health conditions, and I'm learning a lot more about the biophysiological nature of how physical health concerns and diagnoses affect the brain, and how the brain can also then in turn affect the physiological condition. In simple terms, we call that top down and bottom up. Sometimes we can experience pain in our body, or symptoms in our body like heart racing or anything like that, something hormonal, something with the endocrine system, digestive, and then it has an effect where we start thinking anxious thoughts. And then other times we are thinking anxious thoughts, and then the bodies react, right? So that's what they call top down and bottom up processing and functioning. And so the lesson that I'm trying to get across is something horrible, like a fucking heart attack, and missing work. My wife and our credit was ruined from that, and we lost our apartments, and we were just so new in our relationship, and we didn't feel safe and secure, and we lost so much, and that became that experience of having a heart attack and being out of work and being able to provide for her and for the family was at the time just pure suffering, because it didn't make sense. No, it makes sense to me why something like that would happen. Going a little bit down deeper, also had a very existential crisis when I was first diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I remember I was a junior in college, and I could do a whole episode just on that, so I won't get into it too much. But I had this crisis where I said to myself, how could I be a psychotherapist if I have bipolar disorder? I'm fucked up. How can I possibly help people? What I'm finding is now, this is one of the main reasons why people reach out to me. They're like, oh, you get it. You can understand what it is. And I will say I do get it. I understand. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, it's something else where you're in a position where, or I should say, I'm in a position where I have been in the hospital. One of my patients calls it a grippy sock vacation, and I really like that. But I've had a grippy sock vacation. I've had dealings with medications that were terrible. I've had shit therapists. I've had great therapists. I've had really bad medication situations. I've had great medication situations. I've had people who don't support mental health and me. And then I've had people in my life who have been outstanding in my life and helping me work through my mental health journey. Friends that were literally there when I was wrapped up in towels at Tufts Hospital in Boston, and didn't know what day it was. I was completely psychotic at that point. again, a meaningfulness, right? So tying it back to purpose and meaningfulness and existentialism. Now it makes sense to me why that happened, right? Because I have a, not that other therapists don't have the capacity for this, but I think being on both sides of the couch is the way I put it, right? Even though it's telehealth these days and we're not really using the couch, but it's still both sides of the proverbial couch, where I know what it is for myself. Um, and the key thing to being a good clinician and also having the condition is knowing how to separate your experience from other people. That gets missed a lot sometimes when you have like the peer approach. Some people kind of project their experiences onto others. Oh, I have bipolar, therefore you must be just like this. Like I say to almost every one of my patients, you could take 100 people with bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, personality disorders, and you can put them in a room and everyone presents differently, which was such a tricky thing because it's not what we learn in graduate school at all. Like the diagnostic manual out the window in some ways, and not always, but like a lot of the times. Everyone has different genetics, everyone has different grounds, different value systems, different interests, different ways in which they think, different jobs, you name it, and mental health does not look like what people think it looks like a lot of the time. A lot of the time it's people suffer in silence. And that's essentially why I wanted to create this. I know there's other platforms out there too, most likely, that have conversations about mental health. And this is one of many, but I hope it's useful, and I hope it grows into something just not from a monetary standpoint, but just from a stance that I really hope this kind of reaches out to a lot of different folks. And so, again, to just kind of wrap up, it's Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. It's an outstanding book. I mean, really, it's a must read in many ways, especially if you're at a crossroads, right? And you're kind of in a position where you're suffering, right? And you can't make meaning of the pain. There's a Franciscan. I'll preface this by saying I'm not deeply religious. I was raised to be, but I do integrate some faith elements to things. And Richard Rohr is a Franciscan, and this was actually pointed out to me by another therapist. He said, the Richard Rohr said that we have to transform our pain, otherwise we're bound to transmit our pain out. And I think it's a very deep thing. You see a lot of people who are suffering, but sometimes they don't know how much they're suffering, and they don't know what to do about it, right? And quite frankly, it's not the easiest thing to get good mental health treatment, but that's a whole other topic, right? But I'll close with this. He was coming counter to Freud. He was challenging Freudian thought, which was the foremost authority at the time. I'll just give you his best quote, in my opinion. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Quite a powerful thing, because oftentimes, I mean, in some ways, it's a bit Buddhist. But what he's saying is, oftentimes we tangle and tussle and fight with things that we can't control. And so we look to change ourselves in many ways too. You could tie that to the Serenity Prayer with Alcoholics Anonymous, right? Recognizing what you can and cannot change and hoping to find the wisdom between the two. People also says life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by a lack of meaning and purpose. Again, there it is there, right? Meaning and purpose. Life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by a lack of meaning and purpose. What's coming from a man who was in Auschwitz? On earth. And yet he gained this perspective, this logotherapy that he came up with. And I'll close with this. Again, another really strong statement from Frankl. He says, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. An empowering statement. It's a very empowering statement because he saw everything being taken away, literally, quite literally, limbs taken away from people. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, choice, to choose your attitude. Now, we can't always choose our feelings right away. Those just happen naturally. What he's saying is choose your attitude towards the scenario. It's one thing you can control. The Nazis tried to take everything from him and from those in the internment camp. Frankl says, you're not taking my mind. You can take everything else. Take my food, take my water, take my clothes, take my freedom, my ability to feel like a human being. And I'm still gonna choose a certain attitude. In that sense, his spirit couldn't be killed. Very strong. So hopefully that was useful for everyone as a first post. We're digging into existential psychology. If you have any comments or questions, please write them in. I'd love to have a dialogue with you about this stuff, for sure. And we'll get more into this stuff. This is just the first of many. So now I'll sign off. David Capolas from Anchor Talk Counseling. Be well.